Good evening, everyone. My name is Patty Hine. I'll be your MC this evening. If you will stay with me here, we begin by acknowledging that this land where we are gathered is the land of traditional villages of Kalapuya people, members of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde Community of Oregon. We recognize the painful truth that European contact and settlement brought forcible relocations and other policies that stripped them of their lands and rights. They are still here and struggle to hold on to their traditional ways. We recognize the resilience and sovereign rights of tribal people. We know that this means considering the ways that our own actions and words can back this up. It's our responsibility to oppose continued colonization. Right? Welcome to our second Climate Town Hall. This is the second in a series of 4 and focuses on 3 high-ranking ideas around transportation that you harvested at our first town hall in February. Transportation is the sector with the highest greenhouse emissions. How appropriate that we're starting here tonight. We have a fast-paced agenda for you this evening with expert presenters in the 3 focus areas: making walking and biking safer, increasing transit ridership, and electrification of passenger transportation. Tonight is our night to learn how policy like this is made and identify the organizing actions we can spend our time on to speed the transition. In a few minutes, after a general transportation overview, I will ask you to break into one of those 3 groups. We'll follow the presenter and those facilitators to the breakout areas away from here, 2 of them. So be thinking about which group you'd like to break out into. We'll spend about an hour in these breakout sessions with presentation, Q&A, and then organizing sessions. Then we'll rejoin this large group up here, report out, collect plans, make announcements, and close. I'd also like to thank the people who organized here this evening, the groups that brought static displays, and especially Miss Frizzle and her magic bus. It's taken some wrangling to get expert speakers who've been flying all over the globe. They will be here this evening, one way or another, zooming in, and otherwise in person. There's also resource people who've agreed to be here in these 3 areas so that we can make the best planning and make the solid processing that we need for community organizing. So they're sprinkled in here, you'll see. Okay? All right, well, would everyone please take out their resource sheet that you found on your chair? I know that there's more people than 80 here because we ran out of these, but this is your guide. It's front and back of the resource sheet. It's sort of like your program for the night. It says Community Organizing for Solutions on it. Let's get moving on transportation. It has a little short agenda on it, a background so that you know what we've been doing and how these town halls are not about finding new solutions or figuring out what the solutions are. We have the solutions. What we want is to build the political will to make these solutions implemented and move forward. And that means the grassroots, that's us. There's a little background in there about what happened at the first town hall, so you can look at that. There's a couple of groups that are moving forward from that. And also, just to know that we'll be meeting with the groups who organized tonight in 2 weeks over at the downtown center of the Lane Community College campus. So we want you to know about that. The reverse of that sheet has a bunch of resources for all 3 breakout groups. So making walking and biking safer, resources that people can use to get engaged, do a little more research, go to meetings, see what groups are working on that. The same for electrification of vehicles and the transit section. So you all know that we are the crew on Spaceship Earth, right? Each of us has a role to play so that we can continue this miraculous journey around the sun. You know, the time for passive information gathering is past. It's time for action organizing because we recognize the climate emergency. We know it's up to us. Major system change doesn't come from the top down. It comes from the bottom up. The grassroots, that's us. We may never have done this before, but we may know that we aren't sure what to do next. Maybe we're a little rusty, but we're called to action. Because we have the solutions, just build a political will for the just and speedy transition off fossil fuels and onto clean energy system that we know is possible. Let's transition and make it from a greedy, exploitive model of competition and violence to one of cooperation, safe and healthy, peaceful, life-affirming life for everyone. That's what we want. And we're not going to settle for less. Our goal for the evening is to get informed and then make some strategic plans for progress in the area of transportation. We want to catalyze this organizing. Look around you tonight. There's twice as many people who registered. We're so excited. We're going to catalyze the organizing, galvanize the community so we can make the steep reductions in emissions that we need. We have very ambitious targets. All right, we're going to start with a general overview here, and then I will give you more instructions in a moment. We're going to start with an overview from Linda Heil. I'd like to invite her up here and introduce her this way. Linda's been organizing with 350 Eugene as the Drawdown Eugene campaign leader, working with the city of Eugene and partners to create an effective climate action plan that will meet its ambitious targets. Her campaign is growing, working across many important policy areas, including the Northwest Natural Gas Franchise Agreement, you've heard of that, energy and transportation. Please help me welcome Linda Heil to the stage.
Thank you, Patty. Is this coming through okay at the back there? Yeah. Excellent. Well, hi, everybody. It is truly lovely to see you all here today. My name again is Linda Heil, and I coordinate the 350 Eugene Drawdown campaign. And I'm going to be taking you through a few slides tonight. We're coming together tonight, as Patty said, not so much to look inward at what we might do as individuals. It's more about looking out into the community at how to accelerate systems-level transportation solutions. So let's hop right into some context-setting information about transportation and greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please. Transportation accounts for over half of all emissions when we focus on what are called sector-based emissions. Other contributors are heating and cooling of buildings, waste and refrigerants, but this large dark green half of the pie that you see there is transportation, so approximately 500,000 tons of CO2 in 2017, and this is exactly why we're zeroing in on transportation tonight. Next slide, please. That's where we are. Where do we want to be? Eugene's Climate Recovery Ordinance gives targets for our emission reductions by 2030, a 50% reduction in fossil fuel use, this includes gasoline and diesel, and about an 8% annual reduction in total sector-based emissions, which we just looked at. The Climate Action Plan will depend heavily on reductions resulting from our transportation system plan. So we'll look at that plan's goals in just a moment. Next slide, please. Are we heading in the right direction? Here you see the trends in transportation-related emissions from 2010 through 2017. This is from Eugene's most recent greenhouse gas inventory, and marked in yellow is what I'd like you to look at. Gasoline emissions have stayed absolutely flat, and diesel emissions have decreased by about 8%. Now, considering that people have been moving into Eugene and bringing their cars with them, this certainly could be worse, but we have a long way to go to meet those CRO goals and targets by 2030. Next slide, please. We are a society that is accustomed to driving. But in a post-carbon future, cities will need to reorient around walking, biking, taking the bus, and using modes of shared transportation. So this really nice graphic is used in Portland's Climate Action Plan, and a picture is worth 1,000 words. I'd say it's time to turn our expectations and our comfort level upside down and reprioritize. Here are data from Lane County that show how people get to work. The years are along the bottom, 2009 through 2017, and I've circled the Eugene urbanized area and Eugene proper at the top in red. So you see working at home in sky blue, walking in olive green, biking in dark blue, public transit in burgundy, carpooling in orange, and driving alone in green. So Eugene is doing a little better when compared to our neighbor jurisdictions. The others here that are not circled are our neighbor jurisdictions, but that's still an awful lot of driving alone. About 70% of trips to work are made driving alone. Now, trips to work account for only about 15% of all the trips we make. Echoing this data, however, is a 2014 survey done by the city of Eugene that showed that about 64% of respondents drove alone for trips other than to work or back home. So next slide, please. Here you see the data from the same Lane County study pulled out. So we're the two highest bars, but that trend over that 6-year period, 7-year period is still absolutely flat. Next slide, please. What does Eugene's current planning include? Well, the current transportation system plan is guided by the concept of complete streets, where travel is safe via all modes of transportation. And specifically, the plan aims at for three times as many trips made by walking, biking, and transit over the next 10 years. So that's a great goal. And to make this a reality, the city's budget must provide sufficient funding every year going forward to make that goal a reality. Next slide. There are huge gaps to get to our emission reduction targets in Eugene's draft climate action plan as it stands now. So the city is considering whether it should adopt an even more ambitious target than tripling for active transportation modes, and also what target to set for adoption of electric vehicles. EWIB tells us that there are about 1,000 EVs registered locally now. We will need thousands more drivers in EVs to help bring those emissions from gasoline down. Next slide. So the key is to get out of our cars. What systems level changes can help to make this doable? That's the topic of the 3 breakouts tonight. Remember, we are aiming to triple the number of trips by foot, bike, and bus before 2030. A walkable city is compact and incorporates diverse uses like housing, jobs, services, entertainment, recreation, schools, all mixed together. Compact design and development is one of Envision Eugene's planning pillars, so thumbs up to that. City planner Jeff Speck says that the magic keys to making a city walkable are a reason to walk, which can include reasons not to drive, like congestion and expensive parking, a safe walk, the slower the passing cars are traveling, the better, the safer, a comfortable walk, and an interesting walk. Consumer choice plays a big part in EV adoption, and public perception can influence consumer behavior. So what community supports can help here? There is a bill making its way through Congress right now to extend the federal tax credit. If you haven't already called our representatives, give a call. And Oregon has a rebate program for new and used EVs and plug-in hybrids. Training for car salespeople could assure that they are informed about and comfortable with the merits of EVs and selling those cars. Let's change public perception by talking about EVs as the best option today for a new car. Most of us can probably only name a few of the 40 EV models available in the US today. There are 10 more new ones to be introduced in 2019 and 14 more in 2020. Ford plans for 16 electric models by 2022. And the first electric pickup you see here, called Rivian, is due out next year. You can put $1,000 down to reserve yours if you'd like. One model will have a range of 400 miles. However, it's a very big limitation that there are not yet many used EVs on the market. Next slide, please. So where is all this energy, or electricity rather, going to come from? Well, sufficient clean electricity supply has a direct impact on transportation solutions. Solar and wind energy continues to get cheaper and cheaper. The increased load to power EVs will be much less than the power needed to convert all buildings to electric heat. EWEB is due to make new contracts by 2028, so they're in a very good position to plan for more solar and wind in the mix and less hydro. Low-interest loans and other creative financial supports would incentivize much more build-out of rooftop solar in Eugene, with home storage as that becomes more and more feasible over just the next few years. And I couldn't resist including this picture on your right of retrained coal miners installing solar panels on the roof of the Kentucky Coal Mining Museum. Enough said. So that's a quick snapshot of emissions and transportation here at home in Eugene. Changes in how we live are coming fast. We have choices to make. We can make our own decisions about how we change, or we can be forced to react as the world changes around us. Systems changes mean capital investments, but the fixes are becoming more expensive the longer we delay. So let's move forward to the exciting part of the evening now, stepping up to organize some solutions. And again, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Good evening. My name is Deb McGee. I am one of the facilitators for this breakout. And one of the things that we're hoping to hear, Matt, is some things about how policy is made locally on these issues, who decides, who funds it, and how we might have action steps that might effectively create the political will for the changes that we want to see around making ped and bikes safer.
Okay, great.
So after his presentation, which is about a 20-minute time period, then we'll take 5 minutes for Q&A. So please take notes, listen for suggestions and ideas for action planning, and then after the Q&A time, we're going to try to break into some small groups. I'll just say that Matt Rodrigues is, as I understand, a traffic engineer.
I'm the city engineer, but since we haven't hired a new traffic engineer, I'm that too.
He's wearing hats tonight.
For a little while.
And I hear you're an avid bicyclist, so welcome and thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, so thank you for having me. What do you think a good spot to stand is here? Over here. All right, so forgive me if this is a little off the cuff, because working with Matt, I was asked to come speak late last night, so I haven't had a lot of time to put together a formal presentation.
And we'll thank you for jumping in on short notice.
Yeah, no worries. But I think what I'll try to present to what you'd like to learn. What I'm going to talk about is kind of how transportation decisions are made, a little bit about funding, some examples of projects, ways that you can be involved in the decision-making process. And I see Rob Interfeld from the city is here too, so he can interject if I'm missing something along the way. So when you're looking, I just put this together today, and hopefully it makes some sense. But what it's meant to convey is that when we talk about the way that we want our city to be built, the way we want our systems to work, it really starts at the vision for our city, which is the comprehensive plan. So Envision Eugene, many of you are probably familiar with that process. I think I heard the first speaker talking about it, but it's basically a plan for how we're going to develop now in the next 20 years in Eugene. It's taking population forecasts, it's thinking about how we want to change land use, how we want to densify, and includes goals related to the climate, natural hazards, and other many goals across the city. So that's at the top of the kind of the trickle down of how we go from envisioning our city to a project that gets selected. Along the way through all these levels, the climate recovery ordinance or natural hazards mitigation plan and community input they impact every level along the way. So that's what this is meant to represent on the left. So once you have your land use plan in place, you have to develop all the plans for your facilities, whether it's transportation, stormwater, wastewater. They all need to reflect being able to get to your vision of that 20-year development of Eugene. So we have a transportation system plan that we put together and adopted I think it's 2 years ago now, that is the vision for how transportation will support implementation of land use, meet our climate recovery goals, and have a resilient city. That transportation system plan has projects in it. So there was a robust community process to talk about what we thought that transportation vision to support our comprehensive plan should be. And in it are specific projects for ped and bike improvements, upgrades to existing what we call unimproved streets, so streets that don't have curb gutter sidewalks within our city limits, and then streets that would be built for new housing or industrial use, although there really aren't that many of those in the plan. A lot of it is how we change our transportation infrastructure to have more of a focus on active modes. We also talk about transit projects, but the city of Eugene does not typically have anything to do with funding the transit projects, but we do include that in our planning. You see over here Vision Zero and an ADA transition plan. So some of you may know that we just recently adopted our Vision Zero action plan. We actually talked to City Council and presented that earlier this week. So we're really excited about having that final barrier to permanent adoption. Vision Zero is our vision for transportation safety in the city, and it's a goal of 0 fatalities and serious injuries by 2035. So a very ambitious goal for our transportation system. So our transportation system plan has a transportation safety element. Vision Zero is a refinement of that, and they are going to inform each other as we go forward. We're likely to make amendments to our transportation system plan that's informed with the work we've done to create the Vision Zero action plan, because that's newer than the transportation system plan. We also have an ADA transition plan, which is accessibility in the rights of way, making sure that people of all abilities can use our right of way. So those are foundational. And those 3 plans inform what's called our capital improvement plan. That is a 6-year document, and we just adopted our capital improvement plan for the next 6 years. That actually has projects in it and budget that goes with them. It says this is what we're going to build. On the far right, you also have priority maintenance needs. So those can inform the capital improvement plan or go directly to budgeted projects. So if we have a need we're hearing from maintenance and it's immediate, that might go right to a project and not have to go through this formal process to go do a capital improvement plan. So I know that's a little complex, but that's kind of the trickle down of how we have a vision for our city. We think about how that vision affects transportation. We think about safety and accessibility. We plan those documents in a 6-year document that looks at funding projects, and then we get to projects. Matt, can you go to the next slide? So let's talk a little bit about the world of funding that goes into bike ped projects. So it's meant to kind of be most flexible to least flexible or specific on this continuum. We actually have probably more options for funding pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure than in the 15 years I've been here, which is really exciting. There's a lot of programs to support that. We have the street bond that we passed, the 3rd one we passed, which has $1 million a year for bike and pedestrian projects. We can use that in the right of way, so on streets to do improvements, to sidewalks, to bike lanes, protected bike lanes, crossings, and we can use it outside of the streets. We can use it on shared use paths. So it's very flexible, but it's limited, right? It's 5 years of $1 million a year, and there's a lot of needs. We have the portion of the street bond and our local gas tax that go to paving our streets. And while that may not seem like an immediate tie to bike and ped improvements, we actually do a lot of bike and ped improvements through that project, because when you repave a street, it's an open canvas, and we can talk about how we apportion the right of way, depending on what was there, what the need is, our connectivity and our plans. So we do a lot of work with for instance, 7th Place, which is in West Eugene, goes by Home Depot and connects to 7th Avenue. This last summer, we had a paving project on that street. We looked to see if the 2 lanes eastbound were needed, add 2 lanes eastbound and 1 lane westbound. We analyzed that we didn't need 2 lanes eastbound. We took a lane off. We put in bike lanes center turn lane. You have about a 30% crash reduction rate getting rid of that extra lane. Now you have bike facilities. So, and that's because we were paving the street. We could go in and make that change. And there's a lot of examples of where we do that. On West Amazon, we just repaved it and we buffered the existing bike lane that was there because we had that opportunity at the time. Road fund general capital, so that's basically the gas tax we get from the state. In 2017, there was a transportation bill that was passed that started incrementally raising the state gas tax. That's led to more funding coming to Eugene, and we've split that between enhancing some maintenance services. We actually added a position that's focusing on Vision Zero and really digging into crash data, which has been awesome and has allowed us to position ourselves for some grant funding I'll talk about in a little while. There's also a small portion of that, I think it's in the range of $500,000 a year, that we have towards capital projects. It's traffic calming, so we added another $75,000 a year to do traffic calming in the city, and we have about $250,000 a year to just change the system where it makes sense to change it. Some of that may be bike ped related, some of it may be just be like a one-way street being two-wayed because it makes more sense and there's less out-of-direction travel. So there's opportunity with that funding as well. We have transportation system development funds. Those are the charges that developers pay or even a home builder when they build a house, build a business, they have an impact in the system. We collect funds from that, and those are actually based on the project list in the transportation system plan. So that is, those funds are collected at the rate of development. So if we develop at the rate that Envision Eugene would forecast, it would be about $100 million in 20 years. It's probably going to be, well, if we go at the rate we are now, it's not going to be that much, but with what's happening with climate and shifts in population, we may get there. So that allows us funding to do very specific projects, and it doesn't fund the projects completely. The portion that it funds is the portion that is a result of new growth. So it can't be putting a bike lane on a street where it won't fully fund putting a bike lane on a street where 50% of the people that use it already lived here. It'll fund 50% of that bike lane, not the whole thing. So you have to kind of put together funding sources to get the whole project funded. But that's actually one of our primary sources, and we just redid that methodology and increased that rate by about 50%. So we have more funding for that work. Safe Routes to School grants, that was another thing that came out of the transportation bill from 2017. There's now, I think is it 10 or 15 million a year, Rob, statewide for Safe Routes to School?
It's 10, but it'll increase to 15
okay.
in a few years.
So we just received a grant through that first round of funding to do work in the city. So that's wonderful, and that's helping us put in new bike and ped infrastructure. I think if I remember correctly, it has some improvements in school zones on Chambers.
Willamette for the village school.
A rapid flashing beacon at Village School, some projects in Bethel. So, projects that have been on our list, now we have the funding to do. We're really excited about moving forward with them. We have a certain pot of funds that come through our metropolitan planning organization. So that's like the regional planning body, City of Springfield, Lane County, City of Coburg, and the City of Eugene. There's a set pot of federal funds we get every few years that we can basically, it's fairly flexible for federal funds in that we can choose what type of project that we'll apply for. And typically we get, around 40% of those funds that go to the city.
Maybe around $2 million a year.
Yeah, $2 million a year. And we focus those on active transportation and resilience. So we've got some projects that we funded, I believe actually the Downtown Active Transportation Network, which was formerly called High Street, but really is looking at High and Pearl connecting Amazon Park to the river. That is funded partially with those funds. We're also funding seismic retrofits of 3 bridges in town to make sure that we're preparing, if Cascadia were to occur, that we'll have bridge connections that are still working for us. There's another grant process through the state that uses federal funds called Enhance. That's typically changing the system and building capacity. We've gotten funding through that to do bike and ped work as well. And then a newer pot of money is called, that we've been pretty successful with, is called the All Roads Transportation Safety Funds. And that's basically jurisdictionally blind safety funding. It's administered by the state, but if there's a problem in a local street, that can be funded as well as a problem on a county road or a state highway. And that position I was talking about that we hired using the transportation bill funding was actually preparing applications for that, doing a deep dive into the detail of crashes. Is it a left hook to a person biking through an intersection? What specifically is happening? Looking at mitigation factors that we can construct to try to reduce or eliminate those type of crashes. And then we put the grant in. That interesting process is that it's really data-driven and not so much talking to people-driven. So you do all the data, you turn it in. If you get the grant, then you do the public outreach. So we know if we get funds for that, we'd have to go do public outreach, especially in the River Road area, because we actually targeted a lot of improvements there, but there are community conversations we'll need to have. But potentially we'll get up to $6 million through that program from fiscal year 22 to 24. So there's varying levels of strings attached to these and things they can do and things they can't do. When you get federal funding, it's for a specific project. You can't decide because there's an acute issue that's happening over here that you're going to move that funding. It takes 3 to 4 years to build a project once you get it to go through the federal environmental process, run through all the hoops, get the project on the ground. So one thing that we often hear from people that is frustrating is that we can't kind of immediately tack to have a large investment in solving a problem that seems really acute, like it's happening right now. And often that's because we've already programmed funds to a bunch of other projects. Road fund we can do if it's within the right of way and we haven't programmed it out. The street bond funds, we have some flexibility with, and we work with the Active Transportation Committee to think about where we're going to invest those. So those are probably on the more flexible side for how we can move funding around.
Just to add one more source of funding is the Parks Bond that was adopted approved by voters around a year or so ago. Included several $1 million for lighting of shared use paths in Eugene. All the major shared use paths will receive lighting as a result of that, starting with hopefully the West Bank path this summer. Part of it will get lighted and repaved.
Sure.
So how does this compare to the as a percentage for bike and pedestrian projects compared to vehicle projects?
Well, I mean, that's where it's hard to put a specific number on it. What I can say, when you look at our capital improvement program over the next 6 years, we have about $90 million in transportation. The first 2 years are the most accurate. Everything past that, like for instance, we haven't learned whether we're going to get the grants from the All Roads Transportation Safety Project yet. But the great majority of them are for paving projects because of our local gas tax and the voters approving our paving bonds. But those just aren't just about cars. They are about changing the system for all users. And we actually do quite a bit of ADA improvements to sidewalk access ramps on those corridors as well. We have to rebuild any ramp that isn't up to spec when we go through and do a paving project. If you've ever wondered why we're tearing up all the corners when we're paving, that's why. So, so yeah, most of it is going to paving right now. So that doesn't tell you specifically, well, how do you choose this project over that one? And what I'll say for that is that we've been focusing most of the funds that we have that are discretionary, either through asking for grants or where we have the ability to program them for something. Like for paving money, it has to go to paving. We can't do something different with that. But we can do some different things with the other funding or focus the grant applications on different things. It's predominantly going to active transportation modes, pedestrian and bicycling projects. So we work with the Active Transportation Committee to prioritize those. We have our own prioritization through our Vision Zero work that we're really just bootstrapping. We're doing a whole bunch of data analysis to really help identify across the city where the highest, the problems of highest concern are, where people are getting injured and we need to act as quickly as we can. And then we're also looking opportunistically. So if we're doing a paving project on a street and we need extra funding because we're thinking, hey, this is a great opportunity to put a flashing beacon crossing on the street, we might move that up in priority because we're going to save some money by doing it at the same time that we're doing the paving project. Go ahead.
Yeah, you're planning to do a paving project on Alder Street
Mhm.
this year.
Yeah.
And you're calling it a Greenway project?
Yes.
I'm wondering, does the Greenway funding come from a particular source or is it a mix of
I think is that coming from the bond?
I think so.
Yeah, so I think it's coming from the bike ped portion of the bond, and there's pretty significant changes we're going to do on that street, right? We're going to be doing some traffic circles, some curb extensions,
and speed bumps?
and speed bumps. So
There's huge contention now about the speed bumps between what cyclists, some cyclists don't like them. There's a group of cyclists that are against
Sure.
the speed bumps.
So we changed our design, like the ones that,
So that's the question.
I don't know if you were the person in the email, but
No.
we don't build them the same way we used to. We use a more gentle approach.
Yeah,
And so
it's-
they're less impactful for people by.
it's less of a blunt entry now.
So there's a whole group of citizens that really want to make sure that we get the best speed bumps for all of
Yeah.
them.
We are going to deliver the best speed bumps on all the streets. We are.
Cars and then a gap for the bikes.
So the trick when you put traffic calming, vertical traffic calming like that in is not to allow a big enough gap that the cars try to drive around it. And when we have, well, also bicyclists don't usually want to go out of direction too. So I mean, we're working on the standard. I think our standard is gentle compared to some. I don't know. I've seen some in Portland that were pretty interesting as a cyclist myself. But we really do think about that when we're doing the project. And one quick kind of point I wanted to go on to is being kind of getting to where you can really be impactful is being involved in those conversations. So when we have projects, when we're coming to the community and talking about substantially changing a street, that's where we really need to hear from the people that support it, because often we hear a lot from the people that don't. And it's okay for us to have a community dialogue and for people to have differences of opinions, but when we make big changes, having support for those big changes is where your voice is really impactful.
There have been times, even projects you signed off on that went into neighborhoods without you even coming to the neighborhood association. That can be something you're going to be better about, making sure when you're designing a project, you come to the neighborhood first.
Well, so you're right, we don't always go to the neighborhood association, but we do outreach around the project. So then the neighborhood association usually gets noticed about it. I can't say that's always happened, and I apologize if it hasn't. We have some neighborhood associations that are more active than others, and thus we're talking with them more often, so we have less of a gap. But it's probably true that we're not, usually the neighborhood group is not a decision-making body for the project, but it's good to make sure they're informed of what's
When
happening.
you've done things that have gone really well,
Yeah.
you've been with us first.
Uh-huh.
When you've done things that have failed or have been really bad, it went in and we never got any notice. Like,
Sure.
What's this? You know, so it's just,
Okay.
I think it helps shape it better.
Sure, no, I appreciate that.
Matt, we're kind of moving into Q&A.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's fine. I think maybe through Q&A we can get there.
So we got about 6
Yeah,
minutes.
go ahead.
What we'd like to do with Q&A, sorry, Tree,
Oh.
we'd like to do what's called reverse stack protocol.
Oh.
So that means that if you're a historically oppressed person or from a group of people who are historically oppressed, you get to go first. So, Tree? I'm not implying that you are.
So far, in terms of where, like, the goal is for us as citizens to get educated on how we can strategically intervene in the process in order to have more, you know, the end result is we want to end up with more bike and, you know, bike safety,
Sure.
pedestrian safety kinds of things, right?
Yep.
So you're from the city, and the city's working on that, and is going along, and has a bunch of good projects that are happening, which is great. I'm really happy about that. I live on Alder, you know, et cetera, right? And so far, in terms of like looking at where the citizens can connect and engage, you're kind of like, hey, like, don't just be the silent majority that supports it. When we ask about a project and you think this is going to be good because it's going to help bike and pedestrian stuff, like, show up and say, yes, we think this will help. So I've heard that piece.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another piece I heard so far is that, like, anything that's at the city level, and I'm not talking about the federal, you know, you got this grant under this rules, you gotta follow it. But like at the city level, it's like if we're trying to be active about something and the city says, oh, but that's not in the transportation safety plan, no, sorry, the TSP, what was it, the system plan.
Yeah.
We can say, oh, but you can amend that plan. So that's one thing for us to know as activists, right? We can lobby for an amendment to that plan. So what I want to know from you, my question, is what are the other ways that you feel like we as citizens can sort of strategically intervene? Is there low-hanging fruit where you feel like if a bunch of citizens were supporting this thing, it would help you be able to get that thing to happen? You know, what can we do to make more of this stuff happen faster? Because we all recognize that whatever rate is happening at isn't really enough yet.
Yeah, those are great questions. So I will reiterate that at the project level is really important because some of them are big and contentious and we need that support. And also, we want community input on what it actually looks like because there are options. There's a range of options of what a project can look like. We want to have engagement around that. I think, you know, I always recommend to folks to talk to your city councilors and make sure they know what your priorities are and what your interests are, because when they're hearing from other people in their ward that maybe aren't happy, it helps balance, and they can get a couple people that are upset and it may drive them to make a decision without really understanding what other people are doing. I think we need, you know, especially around climate change and around our climate recovery ordinance, we still have work to do, as you said, and part of it is modeling exactly what type of system actually gets us where we need to be. So we do have that on the docket, but I think that is a good thing to keep bringing up, you know. Not that we're not trying to do it, but it's helpful because it keeps it front and center for the city council as well as staff. I think the state legislation is hugely important. So, you know, cap and trade may not have a huge immediate impact on transportation, but when we're talking about analyzing what it can do to meet our CRO goals, it's really large. So, I mean, there's state level things, and actually I'll say there's a SB 558 is about being able to lower speeds 5 miles per hour on residential streets. HB 2702 is about the state being able to delegate local authority to set speeds. Those are big, and us being able to manage our system based on what the vision of our community is instead of the way the state has historically run it. So I think don't miss that the state level is actually really important in helping us be able to move forward.
Can I just add something to what Matt says? We have an e-newsletter called In Motion that comes out once a month. It's all, who here gets it? If you just raise your hand. I think it's a great resource to know about what's going on in our community. And so if we're doing a process where there's a public involvement opportunity, that's one of the ways we put out the opportunity. So if you want to sign up for it, feel free to come and give me your email address, excuse me, or Google City of Eugene Transportation Options, and then just scroll down to In Motion Sign Up. One other thing too is Matt was just sort of scratching the surface about what we do around promoting walking and biking. We do a lot around the non-infrastructure side. One small example is we received a grant to develop new transportation demand management regulations for the city. So the idea is that these are adopted by the city council and actually require employers and developers to integrate promoting people using alternatives to driving as part of their developments and as part of having employees. And so there's a lot of good models for that around the country, and we have a pretty anemic TDM regulatory structure right now. So that'll be another public involvement opportunity at some point.
And actually, we're out of time.
Oh, God, sorry.
Let's thank our